Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our October monthly webinar. Thank you all for joining us. We're looking forward to an interesting discussion today in what are the best practices in conducting writing workshops with Catch the Next author mentor Sergio Troncoso. Sergio Troncoso is the author of The Last Tortilla and Other Stories, Crossing Borders Personal Essays, and the novels The Nature of Truth and From This Wicked Patch of Dust. He co-edited Our Lost Border, Essays on Life Amid the Narco-Violence. Troncoso has taught writing workshops at the Yale Writers Conference in New Haven, Connecticut, and the Hudson Valley Writers Center in Sleepy Hollow, New York. He is a member of the Board of Counselors and an officer of the Texas Institute of Letters. Recently, he has served as one of 3 national judges for the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction and as a final judge in the essay category for the New Letters Literacy Awards. And all right, Sergio, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lydia. Hope everyone can hear me. So I prepared some remarks about the best practices in conducting writing workshops, and they're going to go about 30 minutes or so, maybe 35 minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions. So we should have plenty of time for questions and an exchange. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to talk about I divided my remarks into obvious goals and not so obvious goals of a writing workshop. And these goals and sort of rules and things that I do as a teacher to really create a unique and I hope great experience at Yale and the Hudson Valley Writers Center. It's been through years of practice, years of trying different things, and every year I try to adapt a little bit more given what I've learned. So, of course, you know, some of the, and so anyway, so I hope that some of these you can adapt to your own, for your own workshops with your own students. And I find that every single either nonfiction or fiction workshop that I teach is a little different. And so I've had to adapt on the fly, and these goals help me do that. So, one of the obvious goals of a writing workshop, I think, the ones certainly that the students think about, and I typically have 10 to 12 students, and I limit their manuscript that they turn in to me to review and to be reviewed by them as well, to about 5,000 words, which is about 20 typed pages. And so that's what the students typically are focused on. That's the obvious goal. They want their manuscript reviewed, they want feedback on their work, and it doesn't really matter whether it's an essay or it's a short story, because I've taught both short stories and nonfiction essays as well. And so I try to set the tone before I ever meet the students. So typically about 2 to 3, sometimes 4 weeks before I give them a specific deadline to turn in their manuscripts, and they turn them into me as a Word file through email. And so you set the tone as an organized workshop, and I give them, not only are they supposed to turn in the manuscript to me, but I also give them a lengthy email telling them how they are supposed to start fashioning their critiques that they have to give their colleagues. And they have to create these 1 to 2 page critiques and staple them to the back of the manuscripts before they even walk into the workshop. And I'm doing the same thing as well. And so that's the obvious goal, and that's what most students are focused on. I think the not so obvious goal, even before you start, is that you really have to set the tone to be serious about writing and provide strict guidelines and specific questions to be answered in their critique of others, because often people don't know what to focus on. How do you focus on characterization? How do you focus on setting? How does a plot not seem logical? What are some of the questions you should address in your critique? And so all of these I provide in an email once I receive their manuscripts, and then I kick all the manuscripts back to them, and they have them ready to start reading their colleagues' work. So the other thing I've done before I even start, and I at this point have developed dozens of exercises, is I have these little mini exercises on point of view, for example, on voice, on setting for a purpose, giving descriptive exercises, on characterization. I also shared with the Catch the Next Wave teachers when they came up to Yale an exercise on looking at first sentences, for example, in which I have probably examples of 30 different first sentences from novels and also from nonfiction memoirs, and how to dissect each sentence for tone, for point of view, for grammar, for the usage of nouns, the usage of verbs. And this is very laborious, but this is something you can do actually in between the critique of student work. So typically my workshops are about 2.5 hours or so, sometimes 3 hours per day. And so we do one student manuscript for the first hour or 45 minutes. We do an in-class exercise in the middle. And then we do the second student during the second or last hour or so, last 45 minutes. So these are some of the things. So the second thing that happens with these critiques, and again, is you have to really be very programmatic about telling them what to focus on in these critiques that they're doing of their students' work, because the issue, I think, is always and this is the not so obvious goal of this critique, is that you have to work against the egoism of every writer. And what I mean by this is, although every student goes into the workshop so eager to get critiqued, to get feedback on their own work, what is actually more important in the workshop is turning those writers into critics, turning those writers into people who are able to edit and look at work in a very programmatic way so that they can turn that editing function onto their own work. And so this is the not so obvious goal of working against the egoism of the writer, that their critiques are actually more important for the writer and developing those critiques than the actual feedback and critique you yourself get on your manuscript. So you really want to turn them into better editors. And as I tell them at the very beginning, I say, you get what you put into the workshop. And so the third aspect of what I do, this is again before we even start the workshop, is you have to work to be very responsive as a teacher, but also tough, because I think the way you begin a workshop really creates the atmosphere of working together. And so at the very first day, I pass out a set of rules, and I'll tell you what these rules are about and why they start to meet some of the not so obvious goals of the workshop. So the first thing I do, these rules, I'll read you some of them. For the author, I divide them between for the author and then also for the readers of the manuscript that we're critiquing. So for the author, the first rule is, after you read about 5 to 10 minutes of your own work to the class out loud, you are put in an invisible isolation booth, and you're not allowed to talk as other people are talking about your work. And so let me take those two in kind. The first reason I tell writers that I want to hear them is because this is how you start developing your voice, by hearing yourself. And the ear is a very different editor than the eye. And so they have to get used to editing their work first by simply looking at it and reading it, but also editing your work by listening to themselves. And so this allows the class to hear who they are. And the part about the isolation booth is that listening and absorbing people's critique is probably the most important aspect of the workshop. And sometimes that takes weeks to do, even after the workshop is done, because as you know, when you are being workshopped, it's a very emotional experience, and it can seem harsh, but it also can be very practical and help you rewrite. So the second rule I have for the author is that you can ask questions or make brief comments after your 45 minutes or so of being critiqued by your colleagues. But you shouldn't explain your work. Explaining your work is really sort of a waste of time. Whatever was on the page or is not on the page is what should be discussed. And you don't ever have somebody on your shoulder telling you what a short story is about or an essay is about. So it's really not important to do that. I think the third rule I have is that the verbal and the written critiques that a writer gets are going to be more meaningful weeks later when you have some psychic distance from the workshop and remove your defensive emotions. That's when you should attempt revision. I think any writer that tells me, oh, I was critiqued yesterday and I've rewritten my piece, in my mind that will never really be a really great revision, because revision is really almost starting from scratch, and it takes some psychic distance and emotional distance to be able to do that. And that's why I have everybody write their critiques, so that after you remove yourself from the hothouse of the workshop, after you remove your emotions and you say, Jose over here with his beady eyes, gave me a really tough critique. But then weeks later, you can read Jose's comments and you can say, gosh, he was right. He was right. This story doesn't flow well, and we have a problem with this character, and so that's when you start to rewrite fundamentally. And so that's why it's very important to have every critique written down, and not just said in class. The other thing, the fourth rule I have for the author before we start, and I tell them this, is that you are the ultimate decision maker of your work. But your job is to listen and absorb comments and critiques, and let them resonate with you later, because whatever resonates with you later will be probably right in terms of the vision of what you wanted to do with your story or your essay. And so let me give you a few of the rules for the readers. And again, all these things I pass out at the beginning of the workshop. The first thing I tell the readers of the work that we're critiquing is that they should read every essay or the story, doesn't matter whether it's fiction or nonfiction. They should read it first until the end, and then reread it as an editor, with starting to make margin comments, starting to make comments sentence by sentence. The rationale is, of course, you read it first as a reader, and then you read it next as an editor. And the other thing is, the second rule I give to readers is, of course, focus your margin comments and your critiques on what's on the page. Never make your comments personal or about the author in any way. And this is, of course, something you have to keep reminding them at every workshop once we're involved in the critiques, that it's not about the politics of the writer. It's not about the morality of what's happening with one character or not, unless unless that's an extensive question in the actual piece. It's really about whether the narrative flows well in this particular work. And so one of the third thing I asked the readers to start with is I start with a general question. I say, what do you think this work is really about? And what I'm trying to get to is the subtext of the work we're discussing, of the essay, of the short story. What is it really about? Is it really a story about freedom or the lack of it? Is it really a story about not knowing who you are? Is it really a story about what? Because all of these macro comments, these quick one or two sentence comments at the beginning of being critiqued, will help the writer understand if he got through the message or messages that that he or she was trying to get through in the work. And the other thing is, you'll see the variety. You see the variety of reactions, and as I said, as I repeat to them often, you do not want conformity. You don't necessarily want everybody to react in the same way. And so you have to keep reminding them that a work, whether it's an essay or whether it's a short story, it's like artwork. You don't look at a piece of artwork the same way, even the same person during the same time. And the more you look at it, if it's a good piece of artwork, we'll have many different interpretations of it. And so you have to keep reinforcing that you do not have to ape what your neighbors are saying about this character or about this plot or about the setting being realistic or not. You can be very independent, and you want to say your piece in this critique as long as it's practical. And so this gets back to the not so obvious goals in my workshop. You have to fight against two trends in my mind. First, I think you want to remind them at all moments that you want true and exacting critiques. And that means saying somebody, I like this piece, and what a great writer you are. For me, that's pretty much pointless and useless. And you have to tell them that you really want to say what you truly believe worked or didn't work about this piece. And I usually, of course, always start with the positive to try to get them to tell me what did work, and then we get into the nitty-gritty. And I also teach by the Socratic method, so I believe that everybody should talk. So if you haven't talked in a particular session, I will go after you and start asking you questions about the characterizations of this piece to get what you really thought of the story or of this essay. So that's the first thing. It's trying to avoid these bland critiques or very sort of pat in the back affirmations that really don't help the writer at all. But the next thing is, and they know this too in my workshop, that when you offer a critique, when you say this character doesn't ring true and it doesn't ring consistently, and they give me a very good idea of why it doesn't, why it's problematic for them as a reader, the next question I ask is, how would you fix it? So it's always a true critique, trying to elicit true and honest and to-the-point critiques that are not personal, but also with a practical dimension. I expect all 11 of my people in my workshop who are critiquing one author to also give me ideas, give the writer ideas who is listening, on how to fix this problem, how to fix this particular problem that they may have pointed out. So you want to straddle, getting true critiques, getting honest critiques, and teasing them out by asking pointed questions to the people offering the critiques. But you also want to put them on the spot and say, how would you fix it? Give this writer ideas on how to rewrite this particular piece so that it solves the problem that you just pointed out. And so it also, it forces them to think a little bit more about why it is that they're having this problem and how they would fix it. But it also gives the author who's listening all sorts of ideas on the rewrite. And again, all of this should be written down. All of this should be given to the writer in the written critiques that are turned in after every workshop. And so the writer can take all of these critiques plus practical solutions back home to her room and sit with it for a week or two, and then eventually start the fundamental rewrite based on what she thinks are the best ideas for improving the story or improving this essay. I think the other issue that I've sort of had faced and that you have to be very wary of your influence as a teacher. And again, this is a not so obvious goal. And what I mean by this is that I know that as soon as I give my critique of the student in question for that particular workshop, that most other students try to ape the teacher, try to copy what I'm saying simply because they want to please me. So I'm always the last to speak. When we're talking about a particular student work, I ask questions. I say, what do you mean that this character doesn't function, or this plot is problematic, or there's a grammar problem? I try to tease out the critique and the practical solution to the critique, but I don't say myself whether I think it's right or wrong. I simply want them to, to say their piece first. And by the way, this is the pedagogical function of what I'm doing. I'm Aristotelian. For some of you who don't know, I have a graduate degree in philosophy at Yale. And I was writing a dissertation on Aristotle, and I definitely believe in learning by doing. And this is John Dewey practice, this philosophy as well. And so what I am doing in class is having them practice being critics and true critics. When sometimes you say things that are independent of everyone else, but you may be right. And my job as a teacher is to guide them to the right kind of questions and to the right kind of practical applications to help the author at hand. So that's why I always speak last, or at least offer. I'm definitely peppering them with questions as each person is giving their critique, just trying to elicit more practicality, more specificity on each critique. But I don't actually say who I agreed with until the very end. And I think what happens in my class is people really become great critics. And of course, what you want them to do is to be turning that critical function onto their own work. And I think it has worked very well in my class. I think teaching them to be good critics is really allowing them, guiding them to be good critics. The other thing, I think another not so obvious goal that I have is you have to be aware of the emotional impact of a critique on a writer, because all different writers absorb criticism in different ways. And so you have to be judging how this writer is taking his or her critique. And one of the things I tell my class often is when we get into critiquing different writers, different students, is that the more defensive a writer is, the less likely that writer will be to rewrite the work aggressively. And as I point out to them, that rewriting is better done after workshop. And my rule is, and I tell them this rule, I use it for myself, is that I don't rewrite anything that I just wrote. So when we're critiquing an essay or a story in workshop, I tell them that take your written critiques home with you and work on something else. Create another story, create another essay, and then only after you've done that, after you've left the workshop, you go back to your written critiques that you did in my workshop, and then that's when you start rewriting that piece that we workshopped in class. And really the reason is you're trying to create this psychic, emotional distance from what happened in the hothouse of the workshop. That's when you really will approach your own work as a true editor and make a revision that starts from the ground up, that is fundamental revision, paragraph by paragraph, and even completely jettisoning most of it and just getting a few great ideas from the first draft and creating a new draft. And that's when you start becoming a true editor of your own work. And what I tell my class often is I became a better writer as soon as I got over myself. And so I tell them that's really what you have to do. You have to get over yourself. Once you do that, you can become a better writer, a better editor of your own work. And that means getting over emotionally of somebody telling you the story didn't work, you spent hours on it, and yet you have to start from scratch or do it differently. You have to not just have emotional distance, but some sort of psychic distance, and really approach your work from scratch in many ways. And so this absorbing of the critique emotionally, the isolation booth, is as important as sitting through a critique of your own work and listening, and really teaching them what it means to really listen and absorb emotionally what people are telling you, and then not doing anything and just letting it stay with you, and then what resonates with you a week or two later after your particular workshop will be actually what you should do in your rewrite. So I think one other thing that I am trying to create, the not so obvious goals, and is that really creating a literary environment in which the group is working in the service of the craft of writing. So it's really a goal, a group goal. Um, I tell them together, you know, you're stronger as writers if you learn and continue to work with each other and exchange work and edit each other's work and discuss it in this professional, truthful, critical, but also not personal way, and what works and what doesn't and why. And I tell them, you know, which is true. I still have a couple of writers who always read my first drafts of, or really my second or third drafts of novels, and I do the same thing for them. And we give each other programmatic critiques, and it makes both writers in this exchange much better. And so you go with someone at your level that will do that for you, and you're helping them and they're helping you. And it's a good way to get that editing hat and to look at your own work in a new way. And that's, of course, the whole point of the workshop, which they don't really realize until the end, that what happened was not that their feedback is great. They might have gotten great feedback and they know how to rewrite it, but what had become a goal for them that they didn't know I was trying to push for them is they've become really great critics of their own work and of other people's work. And I think this allows them in many ways to keep going and go faster than any workshop will allow you to do. I think one of the last things I'll say, and then I'll sort of open it up for questions, and so people can ask me, you know, on other issues, and is I also try to teach them to see in a new way. And this, you know, this may sound odd, but I think we see the world around us, characters, stories, etc., in a very cliche-ish way. And there are writers, people like, for example, Barry Lopez on Nature, that is teaching writers how to see in a non-Western way, in a very fundamentally different way than subject-object. And there's also another writer, Alexandra Horowitz. And I assign, by the way, these works to my workshop to read in between and discuss in between manuscript critiques. Alexandra Horowitz, for example, it's a book called On Looking, and she went around a Manhattan block 12 times with 12 different experts. And one of the experts was, I think, her 5 or 7-year-old son. Another expert was a geologist. Another expert was a bug specialist, an architect, etc. And every single time around the same block, she noticed and found new things to engage her and see. And so I think as adults and as if you really want to be a professional writer, you have to be honing that intense curiosity and not assuming, oh, I've been around this block, or I've met this person, or I talked to Lydia and I know what she is. And you stop looking. You stop trying to engage your empathy in a fundamental way every single time you meet someone else or every single time that you go around that block. And so you have to programmatically encourage your own curiosity. And that's what Alexandra Horowitz is doing, is On Looking. So one of the goals of my workshop is also to be assigning these texts that not only are they critiquing each other's work, not only are they doing small exercises in class, take-home exercises that last 2 or 3 days. They're also reading these writers that I think are getting us away from cliche-ish viewing and cliche-ish writing and looking at things from scratch. And so I think, you know, I mean, I'll end with one sort of little tale. I had the last workshop I taught at Yale was sort of a very dramatic one. A writer, Catherine, I won't tell you her last name, but she had already published 3 books with New York publishers, but she had never published a nonfiction work. And she said, I had heard so much about your workshop, I wanted to take it. And one of the things she told me was that she was terminally ill. And so this would probably be her last workshop. And she said, I really wanted to take your workshop. It's you know, I think you're teaching things in a very different way than anyone else. And so it was a lot of pressure, but I think that's the kind of pressure you should feel as a teacher, you know. And I felt it, and I typically lose 5 to 10 pounds during every 3-week period of a workshop or 2-week period of a workshop where we're meeting every day, because I want to give them an experience that they will never forget, that will teach them to look and write in a fundamentally different way than they've ever done. And so, so I'd loved the challenge, and Catherine has become a great friend, and we continue working on her pieces, even though she's going through chemotherapy and a lot of other things. But this is, this is where meaning matters in my mind. This is where writing matters. This is when you're writing, your last piece that will be left behind for you, and will define who you are. And I think all of us should be taking writing that seriously and that fundamentally. And it's not some sort of fun little enterprise. It really should be how you're going to pour out your soul, or examine something from a fundamental way that no one else has done before. So anyway, with that, I'm going to stop. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sergio. I was just thinking that always when I listen to you, I'm always kind of listening or experiencing the talk through two lenses, and one is sort of through the lens of an aspiring writer, and I can tell you that we have some published and aspiring writers on the webinar with us now, and so hopefully we'll get some questions for you from them about writing practice and things like that. And then the other lens is always through that of thinking about as a teacher, and how to apply some of these strategies and goals and best practices that you're talking about for a really different audience. In some ways a really different audience, in some ways a very similar audience. So one of the questions that I have two teachery questions. Okay. One is, I was really struck by when you were talking about that one of your goals is about being aware of the emotional impact on the writer of the criticism. And I think that for me, I was probably 24 years old when I finally learned how to take constructive criticism, because I was always that writer that was like, I'm a good writer, I don't need feedback, it's just good. And then I had to fail to learn that getting feedback from others is a really important part of the process. And so I always try to communicate that to my students, but the emotional impact of it is something that I'm thinking a lot about this year in particular. And the question I have is how to teach really young, like 19, 20-year-olds who are unpracticed writers, but who are also very sensitive to the notion that they could fail in college, right? That they don't belong and that college isn't made for them. And so how to teach that kind of student the idea or the practice of letting feedback sit with them for a little while before responding to it. Because I feel like, or what I've seen actually, is that the gut level response is, that's it, she said it's bad, I failed, I'm dropping out, college isn't for me. Right.
Well, I think the first strategy in my mind would be to get them to write about that, about feeling that I do not belong, about feeling that college isn't for me. Why it's not for me? Because first of all, it'll be a shared experience.
Absolutely.
The other students will understand, I feel that way too, or I've been there too. I've been there when I didn't feel worthy, when I thought I was a fraud, when people made fun of me. When I was coming from Isleta and I was this fat kid as a bookworm. And so get them to write about that fear. Because first of all, it'll create this little campfire in which all of you are writing about things that you don't want to talk about, or maybe you do want to talk about. And they'll say, all right, it's okay to write about this. So I think that's, find their greatest fears or their biggest questions about, going from, you know, where they are to community college to four-year college, and get them to write about that. How does it feel when you're an outsider? How does it feel when people around you, just like when I was growing up in Isleta, um, you know, reading books is not on the agenda. Uh, you know, most people are making fun of you because you are more intellectual than they are. Why are you that way? You're just born that way. And and then you, of course, you start, the other thing I start doing, if this was the kind of audience that I would look for essays and stories in which that is also being discussed by great writers, writers that they may recognize. So they'll say, oh, he went through that too. You know, and this is how he came out the other side. You know, and there are many of them right now. In fact, there's an essay I wrote that just appeared in an anthology called "We Wear the Mask: 15 True Stories of Passing in America." And I wrote an essay for that anthology on basically feeling like a fake Harvard student when I had been this poor kid from the border, and how I got over that. And so I would, you know, for this population, I would show them that essay and say, you know, this is how I sort of overcame that. I think the other thing on basically having them be patient is just, you know, just trying to tell them why it will pay bigger dividends for them when they remove themselves from, you know, from their own work and are able to approach it in a much more aggressive editor function. And again, you know, if you're an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old, there's always a variety in my mind, because I certainly have taught this population before, in terms of maturity. You know, some people are you know, are not going to get there even when they're 70. I won't mention any names in terms of presidents, but there are some of us who will never get there from you know, be mature about their own lives. And I've met some very mature 18, 19-year-olds who are able to understand that. I'm trying to think of other strategies you can do. I think that the first thing is to show them that it's okay to feel that you don't belong, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't get there. And showing them that there are ways to get there, and that other people have written about it, will make them, I think, at the very beginning, feel not lonely about writing about these topics.
Thank you. Yeah, another strategy that I've incorporated lately that just occurred to me as you were speaking is when we do peer review on essays, and then students revise, and then they turn that draft into me, which is sort of my version of keeping myself out of it, you know, at first. I have asked them at the beginning of the class that they turn the essay in. I've started giving them 5 questions that will allow them to reflect on their revision process. And the last 2 questions are, how confident do you feel in this essay, and what changes would you make if you had more time? And it's been really illustrative for me to see, first of all, most of them are not terribly confident in their essays. And secondly, it helps guide my feedback to know in advance what they would change, you know, because then I can say, I think that your idea to add this or to take this out or to reorganize is a great one. Go with that, you know. And so it kind of empowers them that, oh, well, I already knew that before she even said it. So.
Right. Now, let me just add one little thing, because I found with very young students, like 19, 20-year-olds, they're very techy. One of the things you can get them to do is get them to use this. Record themselves reading their entire story, and then have them play it, you know, by themselves when they get home. Just read your essay or story out loud, record it on your phone, and then listen to yourself. And again, you're trying to create this psychic distance between you and your work. Listen to yourself and tell me what you hear. Tell me the issues you hear in terms of the dialogue, in terms of the narrative flow. Does it make sense to you when you hear yourself You know, you can even give them a few questions to look at. Listen to yourself reading the story and see what you can tell me about your own story that you otherwise would not be able to tell me.
Yeah,
And
that's a great idea.
yeah, and you'd be surprised. You know, once are hearing themselves, they'll say, "Oh, this doesn't sound like the way someone would speak." I've heard that so many times,
Hmm.
uh, and that little trick will do it.
Okay, good. And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to use the hand raise feature or type your question in, and I'll definitely read it for you or unmute you to ask your question. While we're waiting on other folks, I have one more question for you, and then I'll turn it over. And that is one of the things that we're doing now. So Catch the Next program has a literacy-based approach. So it's all founded on literacy, on reading and writing as across disciplines. But we're beginning to incorporate math into our program structure. And so I was wondering if you could speak to the question of how you see literacy relating to math acquisition or the acquisition of math mindsets and math success.
Well, you know, I mean, the math, I mean, I love math. And I think when you're doing word problems, you have to be a very critical and specific reader. You have to really understand every single word and its relation to each other to get the math problem right when you're doing a word math problem. And so I wrote a story, I'll tell you, that appeared in and You Don't Have a Clue, and that You Don't Have a Clue anthology, and it's meant for high school kids, in which there's a mystery in the story. And in order to understand the mystery, you have to read this story really carefully, minutely. If you miss one little detail, you really won't solve the mystery. And at the end, of course, I tell you what the solution is. But this is almost like a mathy, techie story in which I'm trying to teach students to read very, very carefully. And so I think that's definitely applicable to math word problems. You have to read the word problem very carefully and understand what it is that they're asking you to do. And so, you know, this particular story called Nuts, the name of the story is called Nuts, N-U-T-S. A high school kid attempts to kill a rival using the nut allergy of that rival. And it's a mystery. But it's also a story about close reading. And as I tell some students, you know, in philosophy, we would spend sometimes an entire semester on 3 paragraphs in Aristotle. That's close reading. And so you have to, you know, I think that's the connection in my mind between math and between literacy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm thinking about too, I have a 5th grader who, when we review his homework, it's always the word problems, and we'll sit there and we'll read it together, and he'll find the moment where he confused a word or confused the cause and effect or something like that because of not reading carefully. So yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, we have a question now from Daniel Rodriguez. Go ahead, Dan.
Hola, Sergio. How you doing?
Hi, Daniel.
Hey, listen. You mentioned something about losing weight and writing, and I think that might be a new twist into writing a book or something. That's something I haven't heard, you know, about losing weight and writing.
Losing weight.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something about that, right? That during
No,
your writing.
you know, but I could stand to lose a little weight.
Anyway, you said that you know, you read till the end first, and then you come back and edit later. And sometimes I think whenever we're reading or whenever we're editing or whenever we're working with a student, we tend to get right down to the editing part. And do you recommend that we wait, you know, just on general papers that students are writing? I mean, do you recommend that we read the whole thing first and then edit later, or you know, or is it just only for those times that you're doing really critical writing?
You know, in my mind, you are a better editor of your work if you've separated yourself from that work you're going to edit with another work in between. So if you, let's say you do a short exercise of 2 or 3 pages for the student,
Right.
and then you do another short exercise of 2 or 3 pages on a setting or a description. You go back to the first one to edit it after you have that other work in between done. And so it separates you in to become a better editor in my mind. Once you have something done in between, you know, the work you're going to edit. If you're trying to edit something that you just wrote, you're probably not going to be a very good editor of it. That's what I'm trying to say. So I think the key for a teacher would be to have shorter works, you know, 1, 2, 3 pages that you can complete, and that way you'll have a series of works and you can edit a first work earlier. And descriptive exercises are great, like having them say describe this room as if you know, a murder just took place, or describe this room because this from the point of view of someone who just lost their girlfriend or boyfriend, or describe this room. You know, these can be little exercises, 1 or 2 page exercises, which shows them to describe for a purpose. And then you do something else, and then you go back to that descriptive exercise to, you know, to rewrite it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. That makes good sense. Yeah. Well, yeah. Very good sense.
Very good.
Yeah, I love that. Then we have a comment here from Juan Ochoa, who comes to us from South Texas College. He says, this is all very good advice. I can't stress enough to my students that the only good writing is rewriting. I have a laid-back style, and I like to joke, and sometimes my students get upset because they feel I'm mocking them. But I explain that the other option is to take things too seriously and risk the rise of defensive walls that keep out all reason. I'm going to take to heart the part where we should wait a couple of weeks to let the feedback set in and detach myself from emotion and look at my own work critically. But I might just be looking for an excuse to procrastinate. Gracias, Sergio. I have to say, I was actually thinking the same thing because I'm it takes me forever to grade, and so I'm like, yeah, I'm just giving them the time away from their work, right, to reflect.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is just simply, you know, I mean, I think I kind of loosen up. I start out looking very serious, but I'm not by the end of the workshop. But I want them to get the work done. You know, for me, it's all about the work.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions out there? And thank you, Juan, for your comment.
Yeah, Sergio, thank you. This has been really insightful. I have a question for you. This is Maria Marta.
Hi, Maria Marta.
What can our teachers do to motivate students that are beginners in the language arts in English? And what did your teachers do to really get you to dream that you could go to Harvard and succeed as a writer?
Well, no one told me to go to Harvard, first of all, because nobody even knew what Harvard was. But no, honestly, I think I was the first person in my high school ever to go. But I'll tell you what made a difference in terms of writing. So when I was in high school, I had this great teacher named Pearl Crouch, who was a journalism teacher at Isleta High School. And when I started writing stories for her, I started writing edgy stories about sex in high school students, about you know, teachers manipulating and being abusive to students, you know, stuff that they did not want in the high school paper, especially the administration. But Pearl Crouch defended me. She said, you know, as long as you're writing something truthful, even if it's edgy, even if it's not welcomed by the teachers, I don't care. I think we're going to, you know, she would fight these battles with the principal to get me to print these stories, as long as I could prove my facts. But it showed me that writing mattered. So getting them to write about their real problems, the real issues, not propaganda, not what will look good in an essay, but the real issues that they are facing in their life, whether it's awful, difficult issues, in the family, legal issues. What you're telling them is your writing matters, your voice matters, what you want to say matters. And so that's what it did for me with Pearl Crouch. She would defend me and encourage me to write about things that, of course, she didn't know a lot about, but she would defend my right to write it. And I think that made such a difference in my life. I understood that writing could be very powerful, especially when adults would get pissed off about what I was writing. And this was here was my journalism advisor going toe to toe with the principal, who was trying to kick me out, saying, what he's writing is truthful. The problem is you have problems in your high school, and I have an editor who's writing about them. Why don't you fix those problems instead of attacking my editor? And that just showed me that my writing mattered. And so I think that's, Maria Marta, that's, I think, what you should be telling your students. Write about not the propaganda, not the nicey things that, if you want to write about sex, if you want to write about, illegal things that are happening, around you, whatever is burning in your heart, encourage them to do that. Encourage them to put it on the page, because I think it'll have a profound effect on them.
Excellent. Thank you.
So I hope that makes sense.
It does, definitely. We want them to be able to write about, their life and what they see. And I do think that's a great point, that we need to encourage them to be really courageous and to discuss their reality, which I think oftentimes we do not do as much of as we should. So thank you, Sergio. I know this has been a really wonderful experience for me and everybody else. We really appreciate all that you have done for our program over the last 5 years. You are always there when we need you. You have Skype sessions with the kids from El Paso, and you've done others at other institutions. And, we recognize that it takes a special person to be able to do that. So we feel privileged to have you as one of our author mentors, and hopefully more of the colleges are able to have you go and visit them in the future. So thanks again.
Well, thank you very much, Maria Marta.
And thank you, Sergio. This has been really illuminating, and feel free to get in touch with us if you need anything from us, absolutely. And I'm sure I will be in touch with you again soon.
Okay, take care.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.